how have successful initiatives with subpopulations informed our work toward the ultimate goal?
Thank you, ma'am. So I think that plainly stated, certainly our vision is ending homelessness. But many people, I think, as we say that, are like, is that really true? No one's ever going to become homeless again. So as we get a little bit wonkier about what we mean by that, one of the ways we talk about it is functional zero. So that really, from a day-to-day standpoint, what the landscape we'd like to see is that when an individual or a family falls into homelessness, within 30 days, we're able to get them the resources that they need to get back into housing. So that's what we think it means success in this space. We're certainly not there yet. And, but I think one of the things that it's important to keep at the forefront of our conversations about homelessness is that we do know what works in many cases. And so, you know, looking at our service providers across the community, including those here at the table, we see that the programs that they have fantastic outcomes. People stay housed. And so the fundamental issue in our community and many others is that we've not been able to scale the response to the issue. And so in that context, last spring, there was an event called, I guess last spring is last month, isn't it? Spring of 2021. We had something called the Summit to Address Unsheltered Homelessness. And that was a community conversation that was really convened by the Chamber of Commerce, Downtown Austin Alliance, and our homeless coalition, ECHO. They decided to let the city crash the party as well, and then invited in a lot of community organizations to really talk about what are we going to do in the short term to really move the needle on this issue in our community. What came out of that was a goal to house an additional 3,000 people over roughly 3 years than what we typically do as baseline, and to create 1,300 units of brick and mortar housing that are set aside for people leaving homelessness. That overall effort has a budget of about $515 million, over half of that's capital for the housing. And as of a couple of months ago, we were at right around 400 million. I said 515,000, 550 million. And as of a couple of months ago, we were right at 80% of identifying the funds for that. So it's very significant. We now are faced with, I think, the challenge of moving all of that, helping our organizations expand in the environment in which we've got some challenges, right? But we also, it's not the first time we've done anything like this. We have really successful efforts and surges in the area, for example, of you know, youth and veterans and other special populations. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to these ladies to talk a little bit about some of those efforts in the community.
Start. Well, thank you. I'm Susan McDowell again, and I too am honored to work with Joe Cath for a very long time. So at LifeWorks, we are fearless advocates for youth and young adults who are pursuing lives that they are just going to love, and lives that will hopefully involve stability for themselves and their families. And as evidence of, you know, gosh, especially these last few years, you know, we're living in a community that in our earnestness and our heart to address homelessness, sometimes we kind of go at each other too, and how we think differently about the issue and the people involved, and the people involved in providing solutions, which makes it even harder to provide the solutions. And we lose sight of, well, hopefully we don't lose sight of the human tragedy, but we often lose sight of the things in our community that are working, that we can be really proud of and that we can learn from. And so one of those, and I'll let Joe Catherine talk about our communities, how we really united around veteran homelessness years ago. But I sit in a place where we have done a lot of the leadership work in our community's movement to bring youth homelessness to functional zero. Everybody at this table has been an integral partner in that work. And I'm kind of excited to tell you tonight that when we kind of launched this 3.5 years ago with some federal funds that we leveraged into more city funds and philanthropic funds, and we got youth involved in solutions, numerous community organizations, and a few weeks ago, we hit the milestone of permanently housing more than 1,000 youth in 3.5 years. And that's any one organization doing it by themselves. That was the people on this table and literally dozens more, each aligning what we did best, listening to youth with lived experience around homelessness, and I think really cleverly leveraging resources, some of them made possible through kind of federal pandemic relief. So we're doing really good stuff, but we're also doing it in an environment in Austin, you know, the graph I'm standing, that is continues to evolve and be even more challenging. So, you know, we're looking at data now for youth who we've made a commitment to help for 2 years, right? And so now 2 years is coming up, and we're looking at what happened to those rents in 2 years when we made those commitments. So the sustainability of housing, even at folks that we're helping, is an issue. And, you know, that's why we have forums like this. This is why we talk to each other on an almost daily basis, strategizing how do we not only put permanent solutions on the table, but how are we kind of learning through our collaborations and our efforts so we can sustain our success. So good stuff happens amidst a lot of challenging circumstances.
Thanks. And again, I'm Joya Span with the Safe Alliance. And I think that I can say as a highlight of my career was hiring Jo Catherine Quinn. And so to the CAB and the board at Caritas, thank you for taking good care of her and keeping her in this community. She is a fierce and brave advocate, and we are so lucky to have her. And when you talked about how much time we spend together, especially Susan and Jo Catherine and I, in some really exciting and wonderful collaborations that we're in, I can tell you that this week we're coming right up on 8 hours together. I think 7 to 8 hours easily that we have spent together so far. We'll see what time we end tonight, and there is tomorrow. So it really is exciting to do this work in a collaboration. And so what SAFE stands for Stop Abuse for Everyone. So as Jo Catherine said, the people that we serve are people who've experienced these different forms of violence. There is an enormous child abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, and trafficking. Those are the areas that we address. There is an enormous intersection between that and homelessness. And so the intersection is that 80% of US mothers experiencing homelessness had previously experienced domestic violence. And 62% of homeless individuals in Austin, Travis County report past abuse as being one of the causative factors for their homelessness. So trauma on trauma on trauma is what has happened to people who are homeless, and then that continues while they are out on the streets. And the longer that lasts, the more entrenched it becomes, the more difficult the solutions become. I am an advocate for starting early, for working with families and not having kids experience homelessness any longer than we can absolutely have to. Let's get in there and let's help that family really quickly. We don't want to normalize homelessness for them. We want people to understand at a young age that safe homes is what they deserve and what will keep, and they will thrive and our community will be better. And if we kick that can down the road too long, then we're going to keep the pipeline going. And so we have to be really, really careful about that. When I think about homelessness, I think it's incredibly important to recognize that it is much more widespread than any of us probably realize or know. There's an enormous number of people that are living on the streets and have been very visible. And in some ways that was a good thing because it put a spotlight on it for our community. But it also can just tell a part of the story for the folks living out on the streets. Families with kids tend not to be out on the streets as much because a mom's kids will get removed. And when that happens, they end up back in the foster care system. And that is not the system that you want your kids to be in Texas or anywhere. And so I will tell you that in my life, I have a son who has serious substance abuse disorder. And as a result of that, he has been homeless. And he has not slept on the street corner, but he has slept in cars and he has slept elsewhere. So my plea to anybody, he slept elsewhere that he probably shouldn't have been sleeping, and that was not a good place. So my plea to all of you, when you see somebody who is homeless, is to think, that's somebody's granddad. That's somebody's brother, and that's somebody's kid. So we're going to talk about all the populations that make up the homeless population in our community today and answer any questions that you have.
I'll just throw in that in 2016, this community actually ended veteran homelessness, and Caritas was really at the forefront of that effort with a lot of other collaborators. And that collaboration wasn't just the social services community, it was also the private sector and the public sector. The mayor at the time, Mayor Adler, really marshaled a lot of resources to pull together so that we could identify the housing. And then our staff was working around the clock, trying to identify every single homeless veteran in the city. That in and of itself was a feat. But I won't drone on and on about it, but we did reach functional zero in 2016, and the Secretary of HUD at the time, Julian Castro, came to Austin and recognized Austin as a city that has ended veteran homelessness. So we can be proud of that, and more practically, the methods that we use to do that can be applied across the system. And so we've kind of got that muscle memory, and we're going to use it. Moving on, you know, the visibility of homelessness in the aftermath of the lift of the camping ban made people pretty uncomfortable, and the reactions ranged from intense anger to intense empathy. I believe that most people in our community want to solve homelessness for a multitude of different reasons. The important piece to focus on is the singular goal that we have to solve it. So this question is to you, Diana. Is there an immediate answer to camping? What are the solutions for camping? And currently, what is being done and who's doing it?
So no, there's not an immediate solution to camping. The solution to this issue overall, solution to homelessness is housing. It's not just housing, right? It's typically housing supported by the services that people need, but folks' ability to take advantage of services when they are still homeless, as you can imagine, is really constrained. They're not, you know, the lack of stability in that space makes it very difficult to really benefit from the services that are offered. And so I'll say, you know, no matter how folks feel about the camping ordinances, I think we all know that having a misdemeanor crime, public camping is a misdemeanor crime. And if that is enforced, it doesn't make the homeless person disappear, right? And so it is a tool that can be used in public spaces where there are particular problems. And it does sometimes impact the footprint of encampments, which did grow over the time that that public camping was decriminalized. But most typically it results in displacement. So we are, playing right now a pretty expensive game of whack-a-mole in our community where, we have enforcement in one place and then predictably in the coming weeks, we start to get a lot of calls from nearby areas where other encampments are growing. And so we have to be responsive to the community. And frankly, we have to, follow the law as a city. And we are, but we have to stay really focused on the solutions, right? Longer term. And so I will say that, we are in the midst of a substantial expansion of resources available for services. The city itself has an initiative that is, I think, far too small, but is how I would like to resolve encampments in general, is that we identify those encampments that are least safe for the people who are in them and for the community at large. And we target those encampments and we are able to offer them direct access to shelter and a concrete path to housing. So we resolved 9 encampments so far in that manner, but for each encampment we've been able to treat that way, there are probably 5 or 7 or 8 that simply have had enforcement and displacement. So I think we know what the answers are long-term. I believe we will make progress on the unsheltered population. We've got an RFP right out now for additional shelter services, et cetera. But this didn't happen overnight and it's not going to get solved overnight. We've got to be intentional and persistent as well.
Thank you, Diana. So Susan, this goes to you. And this is a question that came from someone close to Caritas, and they sent this in. Does LifeWorks have a direct connection to the foster care system so when a youth is ready to exit, they can go directly into supported housing without ending up on a list, which means immediate homelessness? If you got to be on a list. So that's a question. And then I have a follow-up question after that, after you answer that.
This is the question that wanted the real answer?
Yes,
Excellent.
the real answer.
I've been looking for it. Now we have a panel. All right. So I wanted, and Jo Catherine had sent this to me first, and I want to indulge you please indulge me for just a moment to talk about the connection briefly between aging out of foster care and homelessness, because it's really important. And it's an important, and it's kind of an unseen component of homelessness across the continuum. So here in Travis County, if you are a young person and Child Protective Services has intervened and removed you from the home, there is, and this data is a couple of years old, but I can't imagine that it has changed that much. If you are removed from the home, there's about a 50% chance that your first placement will not actually be in Travis County. It'll be in a contiguous county. And we hope that works out, but already the life of the child is disrupted. If something happens and that placement can't work and you're moved to another placement, there's about a 50% chance that now you're not even in a contiguous county. So you are removed from the community and everything you've done. And if that second placement doesn't work, then some secular things kind of happen. You start seeing the behaviors and you become harder to place, and it becomes harder for you to succeed and thrive and attain normalcy. And if you are not adopted, or if your family situation has not been able to be resolved, then unfortunately you may be on a track to multiple placements, and it is almost impossible for any system to support the healthy, normal development of a child in those circumstances. So you see in our emergency shelter, youth who have been in 20, 30 foster care placements, and they're there because we have a lot of services and support for youth as they age out. So let's talk about so you get to the point of aging out, and there is a 50% chance that you're dealing with a pretty serious mental health issue. There's only a 50% chance that you have graduated from high school or an equivalency. There is a tremendous chance that you are at risk of experiencing homelessness. And in Travis County, and this is much higher than the national average, if you are a young person experiencing homelessness, youth or young adult, there is a 76% chance that you have experienced foster care, juvenile justice, or even both, right? So this issue of being involved in public systems is absolutely a driver and correlated with youth homelessness. So what happens at the point of aging out? There are a lot of amazing people within the Department of Family and Protective Services that try to work long-term with youth, with each youth and the kind of circle of support around them as they approach the age of emancipation. There's life skills training. We do that regionally. It's 11 weeks. They may come kind of in and out of LifeWorks emergency shelter as a temporary placement. Quite honestly, one of the reasons we do that is so they start to develop a relationship with us. So, you know, we're a safe place to come to when they're looking for other supportive services. There are some limited opportunities for what's called supervised independent living, which are y'all doing this now? Okay. SAFE does, which is a kind of a transitional housing. So that's available, not at the scale that it needs to be available. And at LifeWorks, we run a couple of transitional living programs that have limited capacity, but are also available for that opportunity. But those opportunities are fairly limited. Additionally, as you age out of foster care, you have the opportunity to access transitional support through DFPS and DFPS contracts regionally. We hold that contract, right? So we run a youth resource center in East Austin where you can qualify for case management, direct assistance to help with rent and utilities, accessing the educational benefits that you get as somebody who's participated in foster care. And at the same time, real answer, it is not enough. Here's also the further complicator, which is that if you're a youth who's been in 10, 20, 30 foster care placements and, you know, folks are skillfully steering you towards resources and opportunities, and you're sitting there and you're thinking, I don't know that I trust these folks. I think I really want to try this on my own. I've got a plan. I've got a friend. We're going to try it out. And that's what they have to do. And at that point, they're adults and it's their choice. And most of the time it doesn't work, which is why we have street outreach program. It's why we, again, actively work with DFPS. DFPS has the option of returning to care under certain circumstances, and that is a lifesaver for a lot of youth because it reconnects them to supported services. But still, too often there is that experience of homelessness. And when there's that experience of homelessness, then yes, you do have to go on a list, because we as a system in the community have utilize a process called coordinated entry, which gets all of us on the same page with the same information about everybody experiencing homelessness who needs housing and support. And then you are ranked in terms of your vulnerability. Now, if you're a youth, particularly if you're a pregnant or parenting youth, you're going to be pretty high on that list, and we're going to try to move pretty quickly. But that's also going to depend on your ability to engage with us real quickly. And sometimes, again, very honestly, that is a process of building trust, building agency to kind of keep those connections with the folks who are there and who are trying to help, but who, you know, may have to do a lot of work to build those trusts. So we've got a whole lot of housing opportunity. Is it enough? No. There are absolutely wait lists that happen and processes that need to go through. Our hope and our desire is that we continue to grow in capacity, and we have programs like our Youth Resource Center, our Street Outreach Program. We have a diversion program that is working and tries to work more rapidly with youth who are more kind of on the front end of being at risk of homelessness. So we divert from homelessness, but it's not an absolutely perfect system. And youth who have been involved in public systems are definitely at greatest risk. So that is a little more than 3 minutes, but the situation.
So tell us some other reasons why youth become homeless besides aging out of foster care.
Yeah, well, aging out of foster care, juvenile justice, it would be wrong of me not to acknowledge the racial disproportionalities of, well, everybody experiencing homelessness, but youth in particular, and reflect almost mirror the racial disproportionalities that exist in juvenile justice and foster care. So, we see, youth going into conservatorship in the state, going into juvenile justice at highly disproportionate rates, and that translates directly then to the homelessness experience. And then what we try to get really right on the service end is equalizing access and prioritizing centering race as well. So that's that is a piece of this. Also, high disproportionality of LGBTQIA individuals. So we see a lot of youth actually in foster care and who are not even successful in foster care. Very difficult to find stable placements because there aren't as many foster care families who will provide supportive environments. Often that has been the cause for displacement in the home, and very often for youth who run away from home. It is because they were not accepted and loved and nurtured in their identity within the home. So creating safe, really affirming spaces for our LGBTQIA young people is a priority. And if you all read the paper, you know that there is now a policy battle going on with doing CPS investigations for parents who are seeking gender affirming care for their children, and that is a real complicating factor for the youth and a lot of just the very brave families who come to us at an Imagine Safe too for support in knowing how to be there for their children.
Thank you. So Julia, you touched on this earlier, but give us a little more information about why the clients that are served by SAFE are so vulnerable to experiencing homelessness, and explain how homelessness impacts them, and then what interventions does SAFE employ to care for these clients?
Sure. So I did touch on it earlier, but when you are abused in your home and you are in such a violent and dangerous position, then you frequently have to leave the home. And sometimes you're able to seek legal services. Our wonderful judge who does the protective order court is here with us today. And especially if you go through those systems and you have means, then you might be able to navigate it on your own. But if you are poor, and if you don't have family and other people who will help you, then you'll probably end up in a shelter. And because shelter capacity, we have a shelter, we have a wonderful shelter, and it's almost always full. The city has just recently purchased a hotel for us, and we will be able, and they are renovating it for us, and it will dramatically expand our shelter capacity. It will more than double our shelter capacity, and that is really, really needed. But when you enter shelter, you enter the homeless system. You are, by identification at that point, homeless. And if you've already had a lifetime of trauma, then that's going to really exacerbate your abilities to kind of take care of all the things that have to be taken care of to get a job and to support your kids. And if the control and the abuse in the family has been so significant, as it often has, maybe you've not been able to work, maybe your spouse has not allowed you to work outside the home, they've controlled the money, so you don't have those life skills to do that. You just have no power or agency in it. Sometimes you'll have families that have accrued massive debt. And it's been amazing to me the number of times where we have seen victims who the debt has actually been put in their name, not the abusive partner's name. And so there are lots of tactics that are used in abuse. Abuse is about power and control by one person over another, and the violence is a tactic. And so all of that just shapes. The other thing about your ability to kind of resolve it quickly, the other thing that happens is the folks that end up in our shelter frequently have had lives of trauma. And so it is very rare for, it is common for us on any given year that any client we serve has had 2 or 3 different types of major abuse in their lives. They were abused as kids, and then as a teen, they get raped. And then as an adult, they enter into a violent relationship with domestic violence. That's kind of the profile. So this lifelong trauma, and then if it gets exacerbated by racial traumas and poverty, it's just shaving away at you and your abilities. So the solution to solve it is not just you get a 30-day shelter and everything's going to be resolved and you're going to go to court and get a protective order and everything's fine. These are really dangerous families and the results get baked in and it takes a long time. So we have very comprehensive services. We have intensive case management. We have shelter. We have transitional housing. We have rapid rehousing and multiple types of housing resources, and that works. People get housed. Housing is a form of violence prevention, and that works, but it takes a while, and we don't have enough of it. We just don't have enough. So that is our challenge in this community, and I think for all of us, that you're going to hear the same song over and over again, is that we need more. Good news is we are wanting to work on it, and we believe that we can succeed.
Thank you, Julia. I'm going to skip a question and maybe we can come back to it, but I'm mindful of our time and want to just sort of curate the rest of the questions so that we have time to take questions from you and from people that are on the Zoom. So Diana, very quickly, this is kind of, are you going to read all these names out? Who is doing the work now, both public and private funding?
Yeah, so I think, you know, we certainly get asked a lot of questions about what the city is doing to address homelessness. And we do have direct activities, right? Right now we're running a shelter. We have the HEAL initiative. We have the Downtown Austin Community Court and the social workers that are there. But that really doesn't tell the story. The vast majority of city resources that are utilized to address homelessness are in contracts with our community providers who have been doing this for years and years. And so when Jo Catherine gave me this question, I thought, she's, you know, who's doing the work? Oh, this is going to be awful because I'm guaranteed to forget folks, right? So I just gave myself about 5 minutes to, like, off the top of my head, come up with a list of organizations. So I'm going to run through it. It's in alphabetical order. I wish I could have it rhyming. I don't, but a new entry: Austin Area Urban League, Austin Mutual Aid, Caritas, Capital A Housing, Casa Marianella, Catholic Charities, Community Care, Community Resilience Trust, Family Elder Care, Foundation Communities, Foundation for the Homeless, Front Steps, Goodwill, Integral Care, LifeWorks, Link, Mobile Loaves and Fishes, Mosaic Center, the Other Ones Foundation, Project Transition, Safe Alliance, Sagebrook Development, St. Louise House, Salvation Army, Sunrise Navigation Center, Urban Alchemy, Vicino Group, Vivant Health, and We Can Now. So that was just, you know, and so I think, and again, you know, I'm sure in the group, you're like, you've forgotten, right? There are so many groups working on this, some large and with long history in Austin. And we do have some newer groups who are really promising, doing exciting work, as well as groups who haven't necessarily been in the space of providing housing or services to this population historically, but are seeing a way that they can contribute now. So it really is, you know, a diverse network of service providers. And I think that's really critical. And that's who the city looks to when we think about solutions. Like, I get to speak on panels sometimes But really our role is to take the resources and get it to the organizations who can do the work best.
Thank you. Okay, so again, we've moved on to progress that we're making and exciting things in the future. The next question is, what exciting projects and initiatives are in the pipeline? So just jump in, whoever wants to jump in and talk about what's exciting on your plate.
Shall we talk about why we've become sisters?
Yes. Julia.
Yeah, do you want us to talk about that?
Yeah.
So there are 7 agencies that LifeWorks, Caritas, SAFE, Integral Care, A New Entry, Austin Area Urban League, Family Elder Care, and did I say Integral Care?
Yep.
Okay. That are working together in an intensive collaboration with the goal of creating almost 500 units of supported housing, which is a type of housing that is for people who have lots and lots and lots of barriers that are hard to overcome, and that and that just affordable housing isn't going to do the trick. They have to have housing with some services surrounding it. And then in addition, about another 1,000 units of affordable housing with that. And we did it first by getting, it's not in contract form yet, but we are working with the county who has been very clear that $55 million of Recovery Act funds will be given to us to help build our capital stack. So there's a lot of housing that these 7 agencies together are putting on the ground. And that will hopefully be on the ground between 2024 and 2025.
And that's a really big deal because it is what we call homelessness response units. So again, serving the most very vulnerable. It is several of the sites are included are working with private developers who are, giving up a piece of their exceptionally well located land and working again in close partnership with those of us doing supportive services and housing for vulnerable populations who really need the central locations for grocery and bus and healthcare and employment, schools and all of that. And we're trying to do some unique stuff with tax partnerships to generate service revenue to support it, so the properties are not only sustainable, but the residents really thrive with all of the wraparound. For youth, the wraparound mean education and mental health support and workforce engagement, right? And so each population looks at it a little different, but one of the strengths of the population, several of us work together for a long time. Several of us have never worked together. So it is each organization bringing what we do best to the collaboration, moving these 7 projects in tandem. So we learn from each other. We are there to kind of backfill when each of us stumbles, because it's really hard to develop housing and to rent housing. So to support each other when we stumble and to learn from successes and to, in some cases, make, pots of funding that we might have access to that others don't available. So there's a little more equity in how resources and opportunity are distributed amongst the nonprofits. So it is a real cool thing that will, again, put hopefully, close to 500 homelessness response units on the ground sometime in 2024. About 100 things need to line up to make it happen. So, where it's like, fight the battle of the day. And, but the good news is that we've just got a community of folks who really want to see stuff like this happen and are willing to play a role in it, willing for their deals not to be quite as good as they'd hoped, because they know they can do this community good, and other folks who are willing to align their resources for it. So, we've got a fair amount of tenacity, not just for our own individual organizations project, but for each other, because strength in numbers.
I'd like to give a little bit of context for that. So our community really just started even, I would say, thinking in a really intentional way about permanent supportive housing 10 years ago. And even then, a lot of it was tenant-based. So we had the services, we had the rental supports, but we had to find the units in the community. And we still do that, and it can be a really good model. But it's gotten harder and harder and harder and harder and harder to find those units. So numbers are, I think we're still refining them. But in looking at our portfolio of homeless response units, last year, 2021, we had about 475 units community-wide that were explicitly set aside long-term for people exiting homelessness. And as we look at things like this portfolio, a Sparrow at Rutland that's under construction, some of the growth at Community First Village, we're right now projecting that by, say, the end of 2025, we're going to be looking at 2,000 units. That is huge.
That's amazing.
And this partnership is a big part of it.
Thank you. It is exciting, and I will just underscore for a second a point of personal privilege. Our project, a Sparrow at Rutland, will produce 171 units. And we learned a few weeks ago that our move-in date has moved up, not back.
Never happened.
That doesn't ever happen.
Yeah, by a couple of months. And it's both exciting and terrifying all in the same space. So we're working hard to work on our lease up plan and get ready to roll. So that's very exciting. And then, you know, there's lots of, the city is issued recently the Manor Road RFP, and there's some of us involved in some of those applications. And then we're building out hotels, and different organizations are stepping up to run the hotels and provide supportive housing within that context. And so, you know, it's not a one solution it's not a one solution. You've got to use multiple ways of addressing this all at the same time. You can't keep playing whack-a-mole. Okay, so what are the opportunities for others to join the work? What are opportunities for the private sector, for other nonprofits? What are just across the board? What are the opportunities for others to join the work?
Well, I'll just jump in and start. Get the list from Diana that she just rattled off practically off the top of her head. And, you know, the first thing I say is just find that organization like Caritas that you're like, the work resonates with me. I can tell they are doing a great job, and support them however it makes sense for you to support them. Sometimes that's financially, sometimes that's kind of jumping into the volunteering or the, you know, showing up at Joe Catherine's door and saying what needs to be done, you know, what knowledge does the organization need that I might have, you know, what workforce do you need, just get to know an organization and get involved first and foremost. Second thing I would say is exactly what you're doing tonight is you are developing yourselves and your knowledge of this issue in a way that is fact-based, that is also rooted in curiosity and compassion, that has no political overlay over it. It's just the facts, because I spent, particularly that kind of first year in 2019 to 2020, having so many reactionary conversations that were really about, you know, I felt people's anger and unsettlement and disappointment in the city, rather than addressing the real issue of human suffering that our community experiences. So just being ambassadors who have both the facts and the compassion make you very powerful in how this narrative plays out in our community, and people will be helped just as a result of that.
The only thing I would add is when you go home and when you talk about this to others and tell others about the organizations, and I know so many of you in this room already do that all the time, but we need ambassadors out on the streets, and we need influencers who can influence and change people's ideas about this so that all of y'all can be part of the group that is not othering these folks. And so thank you for that.
Yeah, let me add one example. Being in the youth business, and I have a young adult son, but we talk about a lot. If you're a parent, if you've had a teenager, you know that there is, and I hope you have not experienced crisis with your teenager, but many of us do, right? But what we also see at a certain point, and I tell folks this, especially as their kids approach the teenage years, and all of a sudden I become their designated expert to talk about it because I run LifeWorks, at a certain point, one day you're gonna walk into the living room, you're gonna look at the couch, and your son or daughter's best friend is gonna be there. And maybe you're gonna realize they've been there for a week or 2 weeks. And you start to wonder, okay, what's going on here? And I regularly get what the best friend on the couch call on the weekend saying, hey, Susan, I don't want to bug you on the weekend, but my daughter's best friend has been on the couch for 2 weeks, and it turns out there's this stuff going on at home, and I think it's kind of dangerous, and maybe so what do we do here? And we finally actually have a program within LifeWorks. It's called Diversion. I mentioned it earlier. It's working not only with systems in school districts to help prevent youth homelessness, but I also call it sometimes the best friend on the couch program, because often I love our shelter. I don't want youth to have to stay in a shelter. I want youth to stay with their parents, if that's safe, with aunts and uncles, with grandparents, with their best friends and their moms and dads who are going to figure that out. So our diversion program is kind of that best friend on the couch program. But I say that, Julie made a point earlier on that says a lot of homelessness is hidden, and it's hidden in plain sight. So where you see homelessness hidden in plain sight, which might be your son's best friend on the couch, curiously for days on end, that could be a form of homelessness. So just even having that consciousness to raise it and get the resources you need to support.
Okay, this is absolutely neither here nor there, but I'm shocked that your son said that you're the expert on youth homelessness. My son said to me about his new girlfriend, Mom, I am learning so much about women's issues now that I'm dating Veronica. So, anyway, sorry, there's an aside.
My son learned about broccoli from his first girlfriend. Do you know how delicious it is?
Okay, I think we have covered most of this, but I'm going to wrap up with one final question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. What does the homeless response system as a whole need to meet the goal of 3,000 homes in 3 years?
So I talked about the exciting increase in what we're building. We gotta have access to other units in the market as well. We gotta figure out how to get our folks into those units. So that's my number one.
Yeah, I would agree.
During the height of the pandemic, we were housing youth at a rate of 23 per month, new youth. The last 3 months, our average is 15. So, we're feeling this, and the numbers are going back up again. We need the units, and we need to provide them the choice and availability of living in our properties, which will be supported, and we need to provide them the opportunity to live in the community and in any kind of complex. So we need more availability.
So one of the sustainability pieces is just continued access to housing vouchers for folks who need ongoing assistance with their housing rent. All of us have the same staffing issues that everybody else is having in the community, and during a time when we're all trying to grow really, really fast. So those are some of the issues that we're looking at solving. All right, now let's open it up to the audience for questions.
I'll take the question about, we don't hand out contracts, and anybody who's had to apply for funding can tell you it's pretty painful, frankly. So why don't you want to talk about what you report on to the city, perhaps?
Sure. Yeah, so when we get a contract from the city, we, first of all, whenever we write that, we have to tell them what we will be doing with the money. We have to provide a budget. We have to provide the number of people that we're going to be serving with what types of service. And then we also have to tell them and so what? What is the impact of that? We have to report on a regular basis. And we're held accountable for that. We're also, and those measures, that so what factor has to be reported on a regular basis. Those reports from our agency, and I'm sure for my other colleagues, it's not only what we're reporting to the city, but we also report on that for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we are constantly doing a mid-year and an end of the year report on what we said we were going to do. Where did we land? That goes to the management of the organization. And then ultimately it goes to our board for review and look at.
Is that information public?
We put our impact report, I think we put it on our website. We might not have every one of those metrics on our website, but certainly if someone asked for it, we would show that. But that's a great question. We should put it out there. We're proud of what we've done. I think all of us are. We don't always meet it exactly, but we get darn close.
The gist of it is, would the city get better return on investment if the city made a larger investments in the nonprofit community?
Fewer.
To fewer organizations. And as I said, I think the tax dollars flow through the government entity, right? So it's going to flow through the city. Our infrastructure around homelessness in our community, our city government is pretty small. My position has only existed for a couple of years. So the organizations you're talking about are some of the biggest recipients of public funds in our city. But I think they will also tell you they are not the big four, as you say, or even 6 or 8 would not say, we can do this all on our own. And I'll let them speak to that. But I think there are a lot of other reasons for there being other entities at the table.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they got to meet their metrics, right? They have to perform. But, and I will say also, particularly as we look at the racial disparities of homelessness, having groups who are rooted and already have deep relationships with communities of color is so important. And so, I think right now, with the resources that we're pushing into the system, we are not in a place of saying we want fewer rather than more service providers.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, one of the things that many of our agencies are really committed to is listening to the voices of the people in the community and the people we serve. And so Susan does tons of stuff with homeless youth who give us information. And sometimes, the big four of us are not the places that people want to come. We might not be in their community. We might not be as familiar. Maybe their mother had a bad experience with us once upon a time. That happens. And so, I think that there's opportunities for more people to be in the work and more opportunities for, the more people that are doing this important work and showing how much they care, then I think we're better off. But what we have committed ourselves to in this 7-agency collaboration is mentoring some new agencies. And so one of the agencies, A New Entry, is one that hadn't done it before. And they have a very specialized kind of population, and we really want to be able to be of service to them and help them understand how to do some of the work too.
There's an element of choice in here that's really important for the folks that we serve too. When if I have a really intense headache, then it's nice to be able to, if one doctor is not taking care of me in a way that I think is productive, to be able to walk over to another doctor, right? That's choice. It's important, it's empowering. Our clients have not typically had a whole lot of choice around who to trust with things that for many of us would feel so unsafe and sometimes so humiliating, being in a violent relationship, having parents that you feel, couldn't take care of you. So we actually have some services that really cross over, and I can't remember a time thinking, wow, boy, we're in competition with Safe Alliance. That's not the case. We really love and have benefited, and our clients have benefited from, hey, okay, so LifeWorks wasn't quite the right fit, so we're just gonna kind of walk over here and see if it works a little better over here, or vice versa. Just having that choice is good. And, honestly, for all of us too, having a little competition makes us better because it's new ideas. It keeps us on our toes. It keeps us watching our numbers and our learning. And I think it makes us better in the community.
I agree. Gaines? Oh, wait, I think your hand was up first. Sorry.
I'm here specifically to be educated, so I appreciate, that y'all are doing this. I try to be a part of as many of these types of things as possible. I run a very small meal support program called Free Lunch that works out at Camp Esperanza. And the only consistent thing that I've been able to figure out over the last 2 years, and been there for 2 years now, is that caring for everybody that's out there is a nuanced thing. And we're constantly having to redo recipes and hand out surveys and figure out who's disabled and who needs their meals taken where, and all those things. And that was very humbling, because, and humiliating, because we kind of waltzed in being like, wouldn't everyone love this? And like realizing that people were sort of, like y'all mentioned earlier, more like distrusting. They really didn't think we'd keep coming. And now we have a completely different rapport. They've accepted us, they know we're coming, we haven't missed a day. And I'm trying very hard. My job has sort of morphed into specifically education, because we have so many young people, because we're young and we're not trained. We didn't go to school for this. None of us are like trained in crisis intervention. We're all musicians and like photographers. And we're sort of trying to change that narrative with the public. I'm like, look, we're not special people with special skills, and we can still serve these people in a nuanced way and have impact in their life. And so I'm trying desperately to help pass on the education to other people who are trying to reach out and help, because what I've noticed is just like people coming from all directions that are like, I want to help. I want to help on this day. I want to help for these 3 days. I want to help every Tuesday, and then it's very hard to wrangle that. It's very hard to explain to them how to help in a meaningful way. And, but it seems to be that there's just as many people who want to help compared to the amount of people who need the help. So like, I'm obsessed with this idea. I'm like, how do we connect these dots? Because there's clearly enough people who want to help. And so, sorry, it's a roundabout way to say that like, for someone like me, I have volunteered with a lot of other organizations. I go to as many of these as I can, but there's a lot of redundancy, obviously, because people ask the same questions, or everyone's got to sort of give the same rundown. And I heard someone say that there's not another one of these until September. So I'm sort of like very, very eager, starving actually, for like, what are the best ways for me personally, besides volunteering, to get very educated in a nuanced way so that I can pass that along. Because that's becoming a whole other chapter of our organization, is when someone reaches out to me instead of saying, we don't need a volunteer in 4 months on that day, like being able to say, hey, we're not sure how September is going to be yet, so we can't task you with anything. But we've got a long list of ways in which you can immediately involve yourself here, depending on what type of care you want to give. So I'm interested off the top of your heads, if there's other ways, other research, other meetings that I could be going to, that any of us could be going to continue learning.
Yeah. I don't really have an answer to that. Do y'all have thoughts? And we're gonna have to wrap up pretty quick.
Yeah, that's huge.
That is a big ask. I'm not sure I know how to answer it right in this moment.
That's
I'm
been
sorry.
the case, like
Yeah.
a lot of the times when I walk up to people, they're like, you can try to be on this call, you can try to go on this thing, and I feel that. It seems like outside of one-on-one meetings,
Yeah.
like trying to meet up with people and then like trying to volunteer with their organizations. I don't know how.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of just ideas, right? And part of it, it seems like I'm loud enough anyway. One is certainly if you're trying to understand, as you say, sort of the issues, right, and the nuance, you can look to some of the national organizations that do a lot of sort of educational, a little more of that sort of, let's look into the issue. The other thing I would say is that ECHO does manage the Leadership Council for the Homeless Response System. And there are committees that have formed, they're going to be work groups, right? And those do meet regularly. So, if there's a particular part, in your case, it might be more the crisis element of shelter and people who are still unsheltered. I think that is a regular space in which you will meet people also from across the system doing work and have an opportunity to build relationships. Also, if you're not on CTOSH, I don't remember what CTOSH stands for anymore. It's a listserv that's been around since the 90s, but it is like high volume sort of conversation in the community.
Real quick, Gaines, and then we got to close it up.
Housing's difficult. There is a supportive housing community within walking distance of here that's being developed right now. Can you describe, Joe Captain, the vision for that and what you expect over the coming months?
Nice.
Are you talking about Aspiro? Yes. Well, we're going to house 171 people who are experiencing literal homelessness at that property. We'll have intense services on site. And we have had over the last 10 years, on average, a 97% success rate at people not returning to homelessness. So
When's the party?
we haven't put it on the calendar yet, but you will all get an invitation. So thank you all so much for being here. We really, really appreciate your participation and attention. And we're certainly happy to field questions just as we're going out. If you want to grab one of us and ask us a question, we're happy to do that. Thanks again for being here. Thank you, Bobby and Tom, for leading the cab, and for Troy and all of the Caritas staff who made all of this happen, and for Amplify Credit Union. Thanks, everybody, and have a good evening. I just, because it was a Google Doc and I just printed it off. Everybody had everybody's notes. I thought I had it.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of just ideas, right? And part of it, it seems like I'm loud enough anyway. One is certainly if you're trying to understand, as you say, sort of the issues, right, and the nuance, you can look to some of the national organizations that do a lot of sort of educational, a little more of that sort of, let's look into the issue. The other thing I would say is that ECHO does manage the Leadership Council for the Homeless Response System. And there are committees that have formed, they're going to be work groups, right? And those do meet regularly. So, if there's a particular part, in your case, it might be more the crisis element of shelter and people who are still unsheltered. I think that is a regular space in which you will meet people also from across the system doing work and have an opportunity to build relationships. Also, if you're not on CTOSH, I don't remember what CTOSH stands for anymore. It's a listserv that's been around since the 90s, but it is like high volume sort of conversation in the community.
We're going to house 171 people who are experiencing literal homelessness at that property. We'll have intense services on site. And we have had over the last 10 years, on average, a 97% success rate at people not returning to homelessness. So
When's the party?
we haven't put it on the calendar yet, but you will all get an invitation. So thank you all so much for being here. We really, really appreciate your participation and attention. And we're certainly happy to field questions just as we're going out. If you want to grab one of us and ask us a question, we're happy to do that. Thanks again for being here. Thank you, Bobby and Tom, for leading the cab, and for Troy and all of the Caritas staff who made all of this happen, and for Amplify Credit Union. Thanks, everybody, and have a good evening.